Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So at the end of all three of the From a Certain Point of View books celebrating the 40th anniversaries of the various original trilogy films, the last story has been a story from the point of view of the Whills, W-H-I-L-L-S, those mysterious beings that we actually met in the Clone Wars animation actually, but it's also a reference to what George Lucas had previously called or subtitled Star Wars from the Journal of the Whills. And Tom Engelberger, who's written all three of the Whills entries at the end of these collections, is very funny and has a grand old time with this one. These are all like quick little stories, each one of them in the three collections, and they're basically just a last little dessert for all intents and purposes. I mean, these books are just major, these short story collections, and so it's a fun way to end it. You basically have the same premise every time. One very super serious person, Will, if you will, who's going to be writing this particular story, and then another one who comes crashing in to interrupt and have opinions about the story. And there's always some great inside joke stuff that gets worked into this. Like, for example, there's, an argument about initially titling it Revenge of the Jedi, and the other Will saying, Jedi don't take revenge, like maybe Revenge of the Sith, which of course presages what's going to happen with the prequel trilogy, and also the whole situation about how the title of Return of the Jedi went through multiple iterations. It was revenge, it was return, it was revenge, it was return, and all that stuff. Then the fact that they're starting the story on Tatooine, and this other Will who comes crashing in is like, you're not going back there again, which of course is something that we as fans talk about a lot. Like, why are they always on Tatooine? It's pretty funny. And then they agree to it, and this other Will says, well, just skip the sandstorm part. And that's a reference to the fact that there was a scene shot after the events of the Jabba's Palace opening where, they had a conversation in the sandstorm, our heroes did, and they cut that from the film. So it's a deleted scene that you can still find online, and instead they handled what they needed to handle in the scene where the two ships fly away from Tatooine. There's a conversation about Ewoks in this, and about how some of the Whills don't like them, but one of them is a huge fan and refers to them as apex predators, which has kind of come up throughout the various stories as well. Honestly, like, it's just a barrel of fun, and it's also a really quick one too. Oh, they talk about the Ewoks' level of courage, and they say, like, it's a veritable caravan of courage, also a nod to one of the Ewok television movies. And then to finally get to be left alone, one of the Whills says to the other, hey, you could write the story, like the next story, like go 30 years ahead, or hey, go 30 years before, like start with the taxation of trade routes, which of course everybody is like, the taxation of trade routes, like when that was first dropped, when they revealed the crawl for the first time, and they were like, the taxation of trade routes. Yeah, so yeah, it's so much fun. That is the story that ends. It doesn't necessarily add anything to your knowledge of Return of the Jedi, and that's perfectly fine. That's not what it's meant to do. It's just meant to cleanse the palate, so to speak. And that finally is going to wrap up our look at Return of the Jedi From a Certain Point of View, the short story collection that celebrates 40 years of Return of the Jedi. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. If you have enjoyed this run that we've done over the last few months, sprinkling in a few stories, reviews here and there, and other things like the Jedi Fallen Order review that we just did not too long ago, I hope you will consider sharing this podcast with family and friends that you know that would love Star Wars, people you're connected with on social media that love Star Wars. The more people that know about this podcast, the easier it gets to be able to continue to put it on for you on a daily basis. And we are already in our 10th year. We are approaching, the 9.5 mark next month. So anything you can do to help support the podcast, particularly sharing it with other folks, is super helpful, and I would really appreciate you doing that. And it just remains for me to say, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. As always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyrighted by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.